Welcome to the Optimum Drive presented by TFL Podcasts. This is our second episode. We did a first episode with the guy sitting over here next to me, which is Steve Dinan. So if you haven't watched that one already, maybe hit pause on this one, go back and watch the first episode with Steve. That one was about cars. This one we're going to talk about driving, and we're going to kind of put it all together. And so just a quick recap. This is Steve Dinan, very well known in the automotive world. You'll see him in just about any racing paddock on any given weekend in the United States. And I've known Steve for about 25 years now, and had him as an engineer with my cars. I've driven his cars, his street cars, his race cars. A dear friend and amazing as a engine builder, chassis engineer, road car builder, as a tuner, all of those things. So for something like this where I really wanted to kind of nail down a little bit of a baseline, since these are my first podcasts, on what it is to be a good car, because they hear me complaining about good cars all the time, because I go and review cars and I come back. I just drove the Mustang Dark Horse, and the brake pedal was super over boosted. It went straight into ABS. You couldn't modulate and trail brake with it. The steering was incredibly direct, which was good. It had zero feel whatsoever to it, and the car was really fast, but it's like it has no feel.
And even great car companies make cars with weird problems, like even BMW, Mercedes, Porsche. I mean, those are the cars I tune on, have things that I don't like about them. Like the first thing I do when I start tuning cars, I just drive it around for a month.
Yeah, before you even...
And what do I like about this car? What do I not like about this car? Then I take the guys and they put it up on the lift, and we take it apart and measure things and try and figure out why the things are the way they are that we don't like. And it shocks me sometimes, given the amount of resources that these companies have and the experience they have, some of the things that they do.
Yeah, for sure. where you're just like, did they just run out of time, money, interest? What was it?
Because were they trying to use a part they had on the shelf of another car?
Well, that's very often the case. Very often the case.
Were they trying to break the car for a certain price point, which is tough these days because the market's so competitive? Or were they just trying to make it for an average consumer who can't tell the difference and...
Yeah, or hoping. Yeah, that's their demographic, is like people that can't really feel the difference anyway. That's absolutely true. All those things are true, and there's very few car makers. And to me, I don't know, it's interesting. It's kind of like you, because I think you're a good example of this as well. Like if you worked at a car company, I would really like driving those cars.
Yes.
So that, and you kind of do. You have your own company that modifies all these cars. And again, we talk about this in episode 1, but Steve modifies basically most of the premium brands now out of your Carbon business, and he sold Dinan Engineering with 2013.
Yeah, 10 years ago now.
So 10 years ago.
Should have retired, I guess.
And did a startup at 69 years old.
I'm not dead yet, so.
he's like really smart, but he's also not that smart. All at the same time.
I spent half the money I made in the first one starting the next one, so
exactly.
hopefully it works out. Otherwise, I spent a lot of money.
Yeah.
Well, I have this faith that I can do it again, that I figured out how I did it the first time. Hopefully that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
My lovely wife has enough faith in me to let me go for it.
She's in for the ride now.
She's a phenomenal person.
Yeah. So that's kind of the cool thing, is like, to my point about Steve, is that whenever I've done this, like one thing I'll do when I go test a car, and if I like it, and there have been several that I've liked recently, because they usually send me to do track tests, and track tests are usually done by manufacturers that are proud of their track product, generally. And so I always like to go find, like, who's the lead engineer, who's in charge of this platform on this car, and usually I'll go shake their hand and I'll just say, nice job.
Yeah.
And what's cool is, like, the conversation that usually spills out of that is from a very passionate, knowledgeable person. And so you can have like 20 great engineers within your platform team, and unless that person up top knows how to drive and understands how a car should handle, you usually don't end up with a good product. You end up with this, it might have like an amazing braking system or 2 or 3 or 4 systems, but they don't work together in this like coherent package that makes for this wonderful driving car.
Sorry to interrupt. The best car engineers are also skilled drivers.
Yes.
Not without exception. Adrian Newey races GT cars.
Yeah.
Chris Simmons, who's one of the engineers at Ganassi, I think is Indy Lights champion, I think he was back in the day. And all the really good engineers, because it's hard for you, I don't care how much school you've been to, how much data you look at, if you've never felt a car in the limit and you've made it change that car and registered in your brain what that change feels like, when the driver gets out of a car and tries to explain to you what's going on, you can't understand it.
No.
You can't.
No, absolutely. And so that's always the disconnect that occurs, and maybe that's a good place or a good moment to talk about this, because we talked about the race car last time and road cars and what makes them good and not. And there is this dysfunction, this disconnect that very often occurs between very good engineers and very good drivers, where they each basically are speaking a different language. And one is objective, one is measured through data systems, which is what engineers generally do. They look at data, and cars have sensors all over them these days, and you're measuring so many different parameters. And they have an ideal thought of what the setup should be, what their data is telling them through their experience as an engineer. And then a driver, on the other hand, is purely subjective. We look at data. We look at data all the time, actually. But we don't look at car data. We look at steering angle and brake pressure and throttle position.
What you're doing to the car instead of what the car is doing to you.
Yes, we look at and GPS position. So we're all using data, but we're using it in very, very different ways. And the very best engineers understand, to Steve's point, because they've been there, they understand subjectively what it takes. Because here's the thing, we're emotional creatures. Like, we're not robots. As much as the engineers hate that, they would love that, because then they're like, I could just program into what I think the best setup is, and technically that car is just going to fly around the track with my programming. But because there's a human being connected to those three controls that make the car speed up, slow down, and turn.
Controls?
Yeah, well, unless you have a clutch, right?
Sorry, just
how many controls? How many are in your car? so now I'm curious. I'm curious. Yeah. So I'm going to walk out.
How many knobs are on the steering wheel?
Yeah. Don't worry about that. Just keep it simple. Okay. So so we're emotional about it, right? So the car can scare us. The car can intimidate us. The car can surprise us. The car can delight us. I mean, it can do all these things to us, right? And this affects how we interact with the car. And so if that language isn't good between the driver understanding what the engineer's trying to do, which I'm just trying to make you faster, everyone, again, trying to do the same thing, trying to achieve success with this team. And then the engineer also needs to understand, obviously, the driver, you could put a setup in the car that technically is faster, but is scary as hell to drive, right? Like, not a comfortable car to drive. And maybe too much on the edge, or maybe, whatever it is, or maybe it goes away halfway through, or there could be a whole list of things, right? So you're trying to find, as with everything, we're trying to find balance and efficiency out of everything we're doing. And so the engineer, to Steve's point, if they're going to be really good, they need to understand what a driver needs to drive their setup, that car, effectively, efficiently.
Yeah, but not just understand what the driver needs, understand what he's actually saying. I've seen so many young engineers, particularly ones out of college, who think data is and the computer will give them the answer to all questions. It will not. Data is an additional tool, is what it is, and it's a very important tool.
It's powerful.
And I spend a lot of time looking at it, but I honestly won't work with a driver who can't articulate what the car is doing. I've had a lot of guys who are really fast, and they're what I call hand-eye coordination machines.
Right.
But they're so busy thrashing in the car, they get out of the car and they cannot tell you what the car did.
Yeah.
They can't tell you if they did it to the car or the car did it by itself.
Yeah.
Because they automatically just compensate for whatever's going on.
Yes.
And they can't tell you. And you can look at the data, and the data will say, oh, the car doesn't understeer. Okay. Does it not understeer because the driver manipulated it not to understeer?
Correct.
Or is it really not understeer?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And the data won't tell you what the driver's doing. This is even harder when you race motorcycles. I'm told by a couple of guys I know that are World Superbike engineers. He goes, a third of the weight is the rider.
Yeah.
And he's hanging
and
off,
he's moving.
And he's moving around.
Yeah.
Right? And as soon as he doesn't like the bike, he's just going to shift his chest or his head or something, or his knee, and he's going to change the bike. And you go, okay. Did he do that, or did the bike do that?
Yeah. Did my setup change do that?
Right.
Yeah.
So you need to have a driver who can articulate what he did and what the car is doing and what he doesn't like.
Yeah.
And I honestly put more stock in the driver still to this day, and I'm an old school guy who started engineering cars before we had data. So that's probably
He's
why.
about to say something that's going to make
What's
me
that?
cry.
No, that's
Keep
fine.
saying it.
No, I usually honestly pay more attention to what the driver does than the data. It's not that I don't look at the data.
As long as the driver is at that level.
And I won't work with somebody that's not that way.
Exactly.
I have two drivers.
It's an important distinction, right?
It is.
It's an important distinction.
I've had a lot of drivers. Like when I worked with Jeff and Tyler at 19 and 20, when we won our championship at GT4. Jeff is one of these people that really wants to pontificate about all the details of what the car is doing in very great detail, which is fantastic. Yeah. You get Tyler in the car and you make a change and he gets in there, he goes, "Yep, I like that."
Man, a few words.
Or you go, "Better, worse." But honestly, it's just as useful
in the moment. Yeah.
You know,
the radio doesn't work for the full lap, Jeff. I'm not going to hear everything you're saying.
And the other thing too is Tyler will always make an observation that Jeff doesn't make, and Jeff will always make an observation that Tyler doesn't make. Yes. So we have two drivers that are both good, but they're telling you something different. Yeah. You take all those clues and you put those clues together, and then you put the data with those clues. That's a third clue. Yeah. And does the data validate what they say, or does it disagree with it? And then if it disagrees with it, why does it disagree with it?
Yes.
You need to drill down and find out, why does he feel this way? Because the data tells you the opposite of what the person's telling you.
And you trust this person. So
and yes, but you need to understand why.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not always completely obvious.
Yep. That's when you get to work. And back to your original point about drivers or riders in the MotoGP example, like compensating. Like I do talk about that in Not From Drive, and I call that the difference between a good test driver and a good race driver. Mm-hmm. A test driver puts in the same input during a practice session or a test session, and just puts the same inputs in all the time. Those three inputs. Yeah. Puts them all in the same time, right? Same inputs, and then that way, when they come back in, anything that he sees differently on the data, trusting the driver has done that, he knows was car setup. So if the car understeer, oversteer, different phases of the corner, things that have changed. Different types of corners, all that. And we didn't really talk about that last time. We started to, we didn't finish it, but I want to finish that point. I was trying to say when I drove for you, that was the coolest part about the relationship. So this tie into talking about the driver now. It's that trust thing, it's that communication thing, where Steve knew me so well that he would make a change to the car because I would come in and I would say in a certain corner, and we think of corners usually in 3 phases. We think turn in, mid corner, exit, and we think fast, medium, slow for corners. And so I come in and I'd say in this medium speed corner in the turn-in phase, the car doesn't want to turn. And he's like, okay, I can fix that. And then in his head right away, he thinks of the entire lap. And he goes, I can fix that, but he can fix it 3 or 4 ways, right? You can fix that 3 or 4 ways. But each one of those ways is going to have an effect on different corners differently. So he knows me and he knows my envelope I can operate in. He knows whether I can compensate for understeer or oversteer, that's going to create somewhere else in some other corner. And so he'll make that change, and he won't even mention the other bits because he knows I'll just fix it. And so he knows the car will just be net faster. If he didn't know me or he thought Paul doesn't have that ability, he would do a different change for that particular issue that I'm talking about. So when you get into that relationship, to me, that's the magic. Like, that's the special part. It's where he understands my envelope, like what I can do differently as a driver, because that's the thing as we talk about driving now, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take a car that is never perfect. We established that last time. And you might make a car that almost drives itself through a certain type of corner. Like, it's really, really carving really easy. And carving means through those 3 phases of the corner, it's kind of effortless. Like, it's sort of like how a NASCAR car would corner through a turn when they get it set up right. They almost literally let go of the wheel. They're more
zero steer.
Yes.
Get in your wheelhouse.
Bonus points. So they're fighting it down the straightaway, and then it just carves through the corners.
That's what you wanted to do.
That's it. So when you're setting up a road racing car, you're kind of looking for that same thing. But the thing about it is, in NASCAR they might have 2 different types of corners, or in Indy, all the corners are different for because you've got headwinds and tailwinds. So I'm oversimplifying what those guys do. It is very
scuff speed between 1 and 2, and then also between 3 and 4. So when you enter 4, it's easier to stay flat than it is in 1 and 3.
There you go, right? So
because you've already scuffed speed, right?
It's more complicated than I'm leading on. I'm not trying to minimize what those guys do, but because we have slow, medium, fast, left and right, and we also have compressions and crests, right? So we have in 3 dimensions on a track. I just came back from Sonoma. Cool. I love the compressions and crests. It's so
I think it's what makes that racetrack so great.
It's so good. Yeah, Sears Point, right? It's just such a good track. And so I was just driving that, and you just remember.
I think your point though about you make a comment and I make a change. oftentimes I'll list 2 or 3 changes to the driver and let him select one even.
True.
Remember that.
And you'll tell me,
this one's going to do this.
You'd say what the knockoff is.
Right.
Like,
this one's going to be this part better, this part worse, this one's going to make this part better, this part. Which one of those 3 compromises would you like? I've had a lot of engineers that don't want to give the secret sauce away. I'm confident enough that I'm probably a better engineer than anybody I have ever had to race against, that if I accidentally tell them some secret sauce, I'm still going to be able to beat them with something else I know that they don't know.
I love that.
So I don't
open book.
No, I don't ever hold. I don't ever hold back. I will sit there and say, I'm going to make the following changes. Here's the ramifications of the changes. Here's the 3 things I could do. Here's why.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll just tell the driver, and he'll go out and he'll evaluate the change. I've had a lot of engineers who don't want to tell them the change because they don't want the driver to parrot back to them what they said.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And that there's a lot of that.
And if you have a driver like that, he's the wrong driver.
You have a lot, yeah.
Right. So my point is you tell him what it will do, so he always knows what he's looking for. And then you come back and say, okay, it did what you said it was going to do, but not as much as I thought. You need more of it. Or it didn't do what you thought. It did this instead. You have to have that relationship with the driver, because if he doesn't tell you that you're wrong,
right,
or the amount you gave me is wrong,
yep,
then he's the wrong person, because you can't make the next change for him. In exchange, you also have to give him the information to make the proper evaluation, not hide things from him because you're worried about him getting your secret sauce.
Exactly.
It has to be a relationship.
It has to be. It has to be. It's like, I always say, it's like doctor-patient.
Yes.
It's like, you got to tell me things that you're not willing to tell anyone else, if this is really going to work.
Right. Otherwise, I can't diagnose your disease.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
So it is like that. It's like this, and that's when the relationship, I would call it functional at that point.
Yes.
It's dysfunctional most of the time within most teams, because it isn't that intimate. That's a good word, right?
Yes.
It isn't that intimate, and that was the magic. So we would show up. I in my head, I don't know why, but like Mid-Ohio in the ST car really jumps into my head with the 328 that we were running with Insight. But and like, there were times in the Volvo and all that we had the same sort of thing going on. But I just remember there wasn't a single session the car didn't go faster, and we were just like strength to strength. Yep. And it was really cool, and the best part about it being really cool is it was so efficient. Yep. It was really efficient. We did not show up with a fast car,
not always.
But by the time we were through practice and into qualifying, we had a very fast and a consistent, easy to drive, carving car that was just that wanted to corner through all the corners at Mid-Ohio, and it was me like on fingertips, barely having to do anything, because the car was just so on point everywhere. Yeah. And so that's where it really works, because you said the magic word a moment ago. You said the right compromise. And that's something everyone needs to understand, that the entire operation is only compromise. Everything is compromise. Yeah. How I drive it, how he sets it up, how the damn thing was built in the first place, what we're choosing to run, how much time we have to run, what the weather is when we're running.
The tire.
All of this, it's this crazy combination. What makes it so interesting is, like, you think of like something like chess, where it's set moves, and that's what's different about racing. Like when you get out of virtual reality, like a game or in a computer, this is not set moves. There's infinite variation between every single thing. And so you might have clicks on your dampers, right? But he'll go revalve them between the clicks if he's not happy about where the clicks are, right? And
or change the thread pitch on the knob so that the steps are smaller.
Oh, for the love of God. Will he never stop?
But Olin's has a thread pitch on the low speed bleed that you could. It's 60% of the other bleeds. You can make the clicks closer together.
That's awesome. See, that's kind of the whole point, right?
That's one of those things where technically you're not allowed to change it because the shocks are homologated.
Is this another one of those things we're not supposed to do?
All
right,
it's fine. But you really think the sanction body's going to take the shocks
They are now.
And check the thread pitch?
If you're from IMSA or please switch off now. This is only for racers.
So even when there's things you're not supposed to change, the basic rule in motorsports is this: when it comes to fudging the rules, in my experience, okay? All right.
Write this down.
If it's a 99% chance you're not going to get caught, you have to do it because your competitors will, and they will beat you.
That's valid.
So scrutineering has to be good enough to catch all the really big things. And there's a bunch of subtle little things, like the thread pitch of a screw and this or that, or the tension of a bolt or a bushing or whatever, that's impossible to police.
Yeah.
There's not enough manpower. They have to spend days taking your car apart and measuring everything. But all those little teeny things, like we talked about the one flat on the spring collar, adds up to the second a lap that we were talking about. And if you don't do them, then you're a second off. right? And so you have to do them.
So this is we were talking about in the first episode, and I want to say it again because Steve said this, and I thought it was pretty cool way of summarizing this. But he was saying that everyone always asks him, "What's the thing I should do to make my car fast?" And he goes, "It's 1,000 things at 1,000th of a second."
Yep, gives you a second.
That adds up to the second a lap.
And by the way, a lot of things you can't even measure. This thing is so small. You just know based on your experience that it's going to be better if you do it.
Right.
And you can't even quantify it.
Yeah, you just moving on to the next thing.
Yes.
I just had to check that box that I'd done that thing with this car like it worked on my other cars, and now we're going to go.
And the other reason the report is so important, you have like in the GS right now in IMSA, we have 2 1-hour practices.
Okay. So no practice, basically.
Yeah. And in GTD we had 2 1.5-hour practices, which is really luxurious, having 3 hours. You have to make 4 or 5 changes an hour because every racetrack is different, every tire, every weather is different, every driver is different, and you arrive at a racetrack and the car is not always exactly right when you unload. And the way you get it to be a good race car by the end is you have to make more correct changes in a shorter period of time than the person you're competing with.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's how you get there,
that's
right?
That's the formula, yeah.
Right, that's the formula. So I will make sometimes 3 or 4 changes at a time. Sometimes I'll make 3 or 4 changes an hour, 1 at a time. Sometimes I'll make 3 or 4 changes at a time, 3 or 4 times an hour.
Right.
But the point is that I'm working my way through a list which I preset ahead of time. Like a test plan of things I want to try that I know this will affect. And I have notes in my setup sheet that says, this affects this, this affects this. Like we're talking about the Audi.
Yeah.
The compression on the front of the car affected corner entry, release under braking. The Packer affected the balance in the center of the corner, and the rebound affected the exit traction. I knew those 3 knobs already. You tell me whatever your problem is. I have a solution for the problem. It usually takes me about 6 test days and about 6 races to really understand every cause and effect that you could do to the car.
You run through like the gamut of combinations.
Yeah, you sweep. You sweep camber, you sweep toe, you sweep shock clickers. You go to the shaker rig, you match the shocks to the springs, you'll do aero testing. When you're all done, you get to the racetrack, you have a playbook. Just like a football coach does, right?
Yeah.
And the playbook enables you to get the 10 changes done in the 2 hours that you have.
Yes.
So you have the best car
when you get there. It's not the first time you've ever done that.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point because you and I dealt with this on the Volvo where we wanted to do sweeps and the existing people on the team
were fighting us.
Were fighting us on sweeps because they're like, we already tried that and it didn't work. And then you go, did you try that? He's like, well, the guy before me
told me that he did.
Said he tried it and it didn't work. And then they're sticking to their guns because realize like setups, you get into egos in motorsports, shocking, but they become points of pride. Even though it's not technically a setup, it's an inherited setup. Yeah. Even if it were that setup, it's like anytime you come into a new team, you want to run these sweeps. You want to do every change you can until you see that thing not help anymore.
And by the way,
till it degrades, then you come back again, right? So you want to see where the stiffest spring to the softest spring, the stiffest valving, low speed, mid speed, to high speed, all the way through everything. Toe, Ackerman, camber, right?
Everything you can do. Also, every car is different.
Every car.
And so just because you tried something on the last 5 cars that it never worked,
absolutely,
doesn't mean you shouldn't try it again on the next car you get. Yeah. Because it might surprise you and actually work.
Even if it's just the newest iteration of a car you've been racing for years, things change, right? And so you're just leaving potential time on the table.
Yep.
And that is the opposite of what good race engineers and racing teams and racing drivers do.
And the other thing is really good race teams with multiple cars. And this is the other thing I've found with small, not good teams. One engineer won't want to share his setup with the other guy because he doesn't want him to know his secret sauce again.
Of course.
Because of his ego, right?
Yeah,
but really good teams, if they have multiple cars, they're required to share all the data with all the engineers. So if you have 4 cars running IndyCar racing, for example, Penske or Ganassi, all the engineers will be in one room. The main engineer, the assistant engineer, and the driver. So if you have 4 cars, you'll have 3 people, you'll have 12 people in the room, and they'll all be sharing comments, they'll all be sharing setups.
You start seeing correlation and all that good stuff.
And then they'll go through it, and then they're required to make notes. Every time I make this change, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened, then they read all the notes. You can learn as much from the 3 people that you're competing against as you can by yourself. Now the quantity of things you can make is 4 times the progress in a given day. And every engineer, even if you don't plan on purpose, will go a different direction with the same problem. Like I said, I give you those 3 options. One guy will try option 1, the next guy will try option 2. And then they'll all 3 is
because they bounced it off their driver, and their driver might have gone for a different one.
Right. And then when you're all done, okay, which one of those 3 worked better? Or, okay, let's put that the other 3 cars. Now let's go through those options again the next session, right? And that gives you the power to get where you need to be in a short period of time. But it only works if everybody's sharing everything they have, not holding anything back, and working together as a team with everybody that knows what they're doing. And you can't get there any other way.
Yeah. I had that saying that and I still say this to all my race teams, like you should be able to follow up any decision you're making concerning the team with the statement, because it makes the car go faster.
Yes, that is the reason we're there.
Yeah, but you're shocked, like how many times that you can't add that afterwards. You're like, well, that just makes us look better, or that's a nicer hauler, or that's a nicer pit stand, or whatever the case may be. Or I'd rather spend money on that than let you guys go testing. Not that you're allowed to go testing anymore, but but all of those things are part of the process. But again, because we're human beings, like to get back to this, like this little bit's supposed to be kind of on the human element of all of this. That's the thing. Like you said, the egos get in the way. I mean, that's the thing about racing, driving generally, or racing as an entity, is it's a lot of people with big egos, because you're kind of at the top of your game. If you're in motorsports, like you've worked on this your whole life probably. You've gone through either engineering school or racing or whatever you've done. And this is like, you think pretty highly of yourself, or you wouldn't be there. It's part of the deal. But you have to be
drivers
humble.
Have big egos, and team owners and engineers do too, because that's why we're there, because we just want to prove we're better.
That's it.
And that's why we're there.
But there has to be a certain level of humility to learn.
You have to put your ego in check, or you can't get anywhere.
Or you won't get any better. Like you can sit there where you are, and then it's just like F1. By the end of the season, those cars are 2 to 4 seconds faster than they were in the beginning of the season, because they continue that development just ceaselessly. Why? Because the other teams are doing it too, and it's part of the process. So if you ever rest on your laurels or do any of that stuff, you're simply going to be beat.
Yep.
And it is very intense, but it is amazing from the sides of human performance, where you can see human beings really performing well, whether it's mentally with engineering, whether it's physically with a tech working on a car that's getting a change done very accurately, like guys that can put a car on it and scale it and be fast about it, and you trust that car rolls off those scales with exactly the setup that you wanted to have on the car.
And when you drove the car with me, I used to go do the setup with the guys. Remember?
I used to
look at all the measurements myself, because that crew in that particular time, because the new team was not very accurate at their measurement, and they thought close enough was okay, and I was making them split like 0.5 millimeter on this and 1/4 millimeter there, and they go, really? That makes a difference? That really makes a difference? And they kept giving me the car I didn't think I had, and it didn't
and I wouldn't give the feedback,
and it didn't.
And then he's like, it doesn't make sense. So it turned out we put the car on the scales, and we're like,
it's not where we thought it was, right? So if you have a really
good loop there,
if you have a really good crew that can really nail it, and I have one of those crews right now. Steve Freeth is my crew chief, and I got a bunch of great guys in the team, been with me a long time, and I give it to him. I know I'm going to get it back when I want, and when they give me back the setup sheet, if there's a slight error in the measurement, because sometimes you can't always hit the number, they'll tell you what the error is. They'll fill out the form. They'll give it back to you. Look, I tried and tried and tried. This is off 1/4 millimeter. I'm sorry. That's the best I could do.
If I had more time, I could have maybe got it.
And that's important too. So it's not just the engineer and the driver. It's also the team, and it's also the drivers working together. If you can't put your ego in check, and you can't work as a team player,
it's a team.
You can't win.
I mean, that's the truth. That's the truth in a business. Like you can't think of where this doesn't apply. You could apply this in a very strange way, but that's a relationship too, because this is all relationships that we're talking about, and it's human beings, and that kind of like. So let's talk a little bit about driving. You've been driving a very long time. You've raced a lot. Like again, not a lot of people I think realize that how much racing you've done as a driver and engineering your own cars pretty much the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And so. The driving side of it, to me, obviously, it's more like literally between Michelin and the stuff I've done with Michelin and the things I've done with you has woken me up and taught me the engineering side of being a racing driver.
Yeah.
And so that was an education that was brilliant, because it kind of completed me in a way, I think. I'm always learning, but to kind of see things through your eyes and hear your priorities. And then Michelin is also similar the way they operate, a massive French corporation, but kind of brilliant as far as their
incredible tires.
Their
the best tires in the world. Still,
their engineering and their research and development and everything that they put into it. They do things because it makes the tires better. If that were their phrase, they literally operate like that. They'll spend any amount of money for that and go into crazy directions.
Tremendous amount of pride.
Yeah, and tremendous pride. But they're learning. They're an R&D company. They're not a marketing company. Like most companies either put their money in trying to sell product that they're copied from someone else, or or you have maybe one or two innovators in any field, and Michelin's an innovator in the tire space.
I spend way too much money on R&D. It's the thing
that's what I'm saying. You're the same. You're the same way.
I could be twice as rich if I didn't care so much about winning.
That's it. That's it. And you would have had, a 16th as good a product as you do, and the results that you have, because that's who makes you you, and that's why you win, right? And that's why I've always liked being associated with you whenever I can, because I know that means that I'll win, and that's why we're all in this.
Yep.
So as a driver, and understanding all of that, and like I said, from Michelin side, from your side, and from other teams that I've run with, but you've always stood out to me because you in a way kind of took me under your wing and taught me, and I'll always appreciate that. And so that's where, like, from a driving perspective, we can show up and, the old, and happens to be a French guy. I remember the cartoon. I am going to get a lot of hate mail. Sorry, Nico, one of my best friends who's French and Brazilian and really good.
That's fine.
And
my last name is French, it's Dinon, but
I'd say but
that doesn't.
Mine could be Gerard, but it's English as Gerard, so we're all fighting against the
But the point has nothing to do with them being French. He just happened to be.
It just happened to be.
He just happened to be.
They happen to all be. I mean, that guy. So
he was a frustrating person to work with because he was very fast and he was very talented, but he had so much ego it constantly got in the way.
Yeah, and that's it. It's like he's not thinking about a good finish over the 24-hour. That would have been a byproduct. He was concerned with over the 24 hours, at the end of the day, him being the fastest driver.
Yeah.
I mean, that was his concern.
And he was quick, and he won a lot of races.
Yeah.
And there's a super talented guy. And
50% like that, probably.
Yeah.
That are really good, that are really fast. They're very selfish, and that's kind of can be their...
And honestly, and it's a problem with human beings in general, whether you're an actor or you're a musician or a race car driver, when everybody keeps telling you you're great all the time, sooner or later you believe it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then your ego gets out of control. One of the great things my wife always does for me, she always keeps my ego in check. That's part of the reason I've been married 40 years. As soon as I get too full of myself, she'll let me know.
I've seen it.
Yeah, and that's fantastic.
And I'm the same way.
Yeah.
She's like, you may think you're all that in a bag of chips, but you'll always be my idiot.
Yeah, it's got to be a little
humble. And she puts her arm around me.
Helps.
Yeah. It's tough love, right? But that's the way. So.
But we all need a little bit of that.
We do.
We all need a little bit of that.
We do. We need that. So humility is important, right? On any aspect of this. So the idea is to have a very high skill set, but still be humble and someone that can work within the team and not have that big ego.
I also believe that you always have something to learn.
Well, that's the humble part.
I learned something last weekend.
Of course.
I mean, I've been doing this for 43 years, and I still go to the racetrack every weekend. It's rare that I don't learn something.
Yeah.
Which makes it fun.
It would be shocking. I mean, it would be disappointing, and you weren't paying enough attention in a way, right? If you didn't, because there's always something.
Yep.
And again, the thing that always, like the stick that gets beat against us that we motivate ourselves with is that we're paranoid. Because we know there are other smart people out there.
Yeah,
there are other good drivers, there are other good engineers, there are other well-funded teams. And if we don't pick up on something, we know they will. And they'll use it to beat us.
Yeah.
And so we have this kind of crazy obsessive, is a good word.
Yeah.
And I call that sort of paranoia healthy paranoia because it's not unhealthy. Like there's paranoia where it's unrealistic and you're just imagining demons under your bed. That's unhealthy, right? But if it's a paranoia where I don't know what that other team does, but I know they're very competent.
Yep.
Then you're imagining, as your paranoia, like them outworking you and outthinking you and outperforming you. And so that's what I'm talking about.
And by the way, that level of competition will drive you to try harder to be better. Of course. I mean, in 2020, we won the championship in 19, and then we back to 2020, and there was a new team called Core who switched from Mustang to an Aston Martin, and the Aston Martin had 7 miles an hour top speed on the Audi. 7 miles an hour. We were at Mid-Ohio. We were in a battle with the championship neck and neck in the points the whole year. We got to Mid-Ohio, and they were on the pole, and we were second. In a 2-hour race, we literally, probably in a half an hour of green running time, had a half a lap on third place. And Lee Diffie and Calvin Fish were on the TV going, well, we normally have 2 classes today. We have 3. We have the Aston Martin and the Carbon Audi. We have the rest of the GS cars, and we have TCR. Because we were just in another zone. I mean, one, the car was just completely dialed because we just done such a good job the year before with the car, and we were just handling really well. And they showed up with a ton of power, but their car didn't stop and handle as well as ours. And so the lap times were very similar. Jeff wound up passing him 4 times in the first race, only to get passed back 4 times down the back straightaway because there was so much straightaway speed. And we still finished second.
Right.
And we finished second in the championship. This is where the BOP is frustrating.
Yeah, yeah.
In the old days, we'd just go to Dynamomer and we'd solve the problem.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right?
But now you can't touch any of it.
Now you can't touch the engine. They sealed everything. So unless the sanction body,
the BOP changes,
there's nothing you can do. We spent the entire year. We won some races. They won some races, and in the end, we wound up second. It could have gone the other way if just one of us would have had bad luck.
Yeah.
But they were so fast, and we had such a good handle on the car. Even though it was the second or third year with the car, we kept pushing with the setup, and pushing with the setup, and pushing with the setup, until the car still was getting faster on the
So are you complaining about BOP with the sanctioning body the whole time, and you're making your car faster?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another that's another important point to make, right? Because there are teams that will just kind of like, cry a lot and not engineer the car.
You can't wait for them to solve your
problem for you. You cannot wait. So that's another important lesson, though.
Yes.
Right? Is like you attack on all fronts.
You have to.
100% all the time.
Yes.
So, how would you describe to me what would be the ideal driver you would work with? What would be their skill set? And we talked about it a little bit.
I mean, obviously the clear person has to be as fast as anyone out there. That's a given. But there's a lot of drivers that are really fast that are still terrible to work with.
Yeah, as we just discussed.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing is important. They have to be friendly. Like we have a really happy team, and I work really hard.
That's kind of cool to hear, actually, or nice to hear.
And I like having a happy team. If I have any person, I don't care if it's a crew chief, a tire guy.
You're there to have fun, basically. But it's work.
I'm a serious competitor, but I want to work in a collaborative way. Like I don't want to use the word party, but like
all right,
but like you really want to be with these people, and you really want to be here. You're not just doing it because it's a job.
Yeah.
And when you get one person who's disruptive or has a bad attitude,
for sure,
it brings the whole team down, and then the team can't win. And you have to, even if that person has a lot of skill, you have to get rid of them.
Yes.
You have to get rid of them.
That's an important
poison. Like they're like rotten apple, as they say, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have a driver that's really quick. He has to be really a nice person.
Yep.
Okay. And he has to be good at telling you what the car is doing and being able to differentiate what he did, like we talked about earlier, and what the car is doing. And he also has to be honest enough to tell you that he's not getting it.
Yeah.
Or her. I've never worked with
a the humility
driver,
thing again.
But because there's not very many of them out there.
I've worked with a few just lately, and they're getting good.
I know, a lot better.
There's one that
opportunities is finally gotten to the point.
Yeah, there's enough of them in the pool now that we're starting to see some real talent, and that's really cool.
It is really.
It's
cool.
really cool.
I would argue that, and I'm not trying to be sexist here, that men have a little bit because of our testosterone.
Yeah, but that can work against us too.
No, it can work against us, absolutely.
Yeah,
in fact,
it can work against us.
I'm a pilot, as you know.
Yes,
You've ridden an airplane with me, and I think it was the FAA, or maybe it was the NTSB, I can't remember, did a survey of female and male pilots or which one's a better pilot. And what they found was that men typically have better stick and rudder control. That's like car control.
Right.
But women make better decisions.
Shocking.
When it comes to bad weather and things like that.
I can definitely get my Cessna over that 40,000-foot storm.
right, yes.
It's not a problem.
So their conclusion was there should be a man and a woman in every cockpit, which I thought was very good for different reasons, right? I mean,
yeah. My mind went somewhere completely different.
But regardless of how we all pretend to be the same, we are wired a little different.
Yeah, we're wired a little different.
With pros and cons.
Strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, right. Everything's a compromise.
Everything's a compromise, yeah.
So that it's kind of interesting. So they have to have. So you're saying they have to have the skill set. So the skill set, and then I'm going to credit, and I think you know him. You know Peter Cunningham, right? Petey Cunningham.
I know Petey really well.
So Petey was very much.
I used to do software for Petey back in the day.
Oh, there you go.
When he won several championships.
That points a finger at you.
I had a contract.
Statute of limitations out on that.
I had a contract with Honda.
Right.
And
okay.
I did all the Honda powered cars in the old SCCA World Challenge. He just happened to be racing Hondas, so I didn't do it specifically for him. I did it for Honda.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So Petey is he's a very methodical driver.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you know him.
Yeah.
He was a guy that was with me at Skip Barber and took me out and in a car, like in a road car, and he's like, I just want to see what you can do. And I went out and drove, and he was just like, okay. He's like, I'm gonna help you because that was really cool.
You're
what
worth
you did.
it.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. And he he and Boris said got me in a car at Sebring, and they would,
I raced against Boris.
Yeah, and they would recommend me to someone that didn't know me in a team. So he was really cool, but I learned a lot from him. So a lot like what you did on the engineering side, PD did for me on the driving side. Just that taking me from like a raw, stupid, naive, but fast kid and telling me what it would take to be a professional, right? And so one of the things that he gave me, I thought was really cool, and I've used it ever since. Sorry, PD, I guess I do give you credit. I'm doing it right now, actually. But he told me that you think of like a driver as like having a bunch of, like having a file folder of a bunch of different corners, and this thing you're just stuffing with information. And basically it's sort of like, you know, when you go to a new racetrack and you've never driven around it before, you're like, oh, this corner's like that corner of the track I have been to. And so you kind of find your familiarity with a new track by relating it to an old track, right? Yeah. And so the folder just keeps getting stuffed with more and more stuff. Yeah. And basically you're getting an operating window that's growing. And this operating window is your ability to compensate for things the car is doing. Yep. So it's understeer, oversteer, and the three phases of a corner, right?
Before we had simulators too, by the way, so you had to go learn the racetrack
by
driving.
Have that, yeah. Yes. So you had to do it. So yeah, that's a shortcut and a half now, yeah, right? Yeah, so one session, you're like, I'm good. Yeah, where before it was like all the way up to qualifying, you're like, I've kind of got it, you know.
Yeah, you're still learning.
I'm still not quite flat through the kink, but I'll be there in qualifying, right? And you know, it was like that. So I thought that was always a great way to think of it, where it's this skill set of balancing a car. So you go out in the car, and your job as a driver is to drive the car at the limit. So that means, yeah, to get to full throttle as soon as possible coming out of the corner. The next brake zone, you're braking as late as you can. You're braking at 100%. You're nice and digressive on your braking, so you're not leaving anything on the table. You're doing this beautiful trail brake to whatever the car needs to kill understeer on the way into the corner and have it perfectly balanced and rotate ever so slightly and point efficiently in the corner so we can get to that all-important power application down to full throttle as quickly as possible with our hands straight, because we've done a majority of our turning and we're firing the thing off the corner. We had a well-balanced car the whole way through because of what Steve did as an engineer, but also as what we did as a driver. And we have that timeline of steering input and then out for the corner, and then the brake application to the brake release to the throttle application are kind of like two timelines, and we're sort of shifting them one to the other, where we can drag the brake in further if the car doesn't want to turn. We can release the brake sooner if the car loves to turn, right? We can do all sorts of different things, and all of that is kind of optimizing the car in a slow corner where it tends to want to understeer more versus a fast corner where typically they tend to want to oversteer more. And you've got all of these little variables. So that's what a driver's doing, right? We're trying to perfectly balance the car based on a really good setup, but as we said earlier, that setup won't be perfect in every corner. No. And to me, it's all those other corners where the driver earns their keep.
No, look, we always need a little bit of help. Like, I mean, modern race cars, production cars at least, which is what I race, always are very pitch sensitive because of the splitters and stuff on them.
Right.
There's so much surface area on the top of the body.
Right.
That a driver can overwhelm the front end on entry.
Yeah.
By carrying the brake too long and have not turned.
Sure.
He can drag the brake lightly and pin the nose and have it an oversteer because he's pitched the car down so much in the front. Or he can come out of the brakes just the right time. He'll let the nose come up just enough to achieve that perfect balance to roll into the center of the corner. And I can't fix that in every single corner.
Right.
I can make it generally better or worse.
Yes.
And this corner is going to be a little bit better, and this corner is going to be a little bit worse. And I can arrive at a very good compromise for the weekend. But unless you help me.
Yes.
Okay.
That's it. So,
unless you help me, I can't make it perfect in every corner.
Would you like a driver to go out and they'll feel that oversteer, right? Now maybe they pit right away and go, by the way, I never did say it. What I was going to say about the French driver was, there's a cartoon where he says, the car is sheet, S-H-E-E-T, because it's in a French accent, and he just throws his helmet to the ground and he just walks to his trailer. That was my example.
Okay, all right.
So there's like an old, one of those ones in the back of Autosport that's really funny, and you're like, that's really funny. They used to have those cartoons in the back of the Autosport magazine, but they probably still do. Yeah. But anyway, that was my point.
Still print magazines anymore?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
Remember I was standing at the newsstand and just
split?
reading them all. Yes, exactly.
When I was young, I had a subscription to that and tried to teach myself German by reading Automotor and Sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was hard work.
How'd that work out?
I spent years like one page at a time looking it
now
up.
You can just point your phone at it and it will
I
translate
know.
the whole
See,
page
there was none of that. You had to actually go look it up in English English-German translation dictionary, and then didn't have technical.
Was that when the spokes were wooden on the wheels?
No, we had metal wheels.
All right, so back to PD and the. So would you like the driver first to compensate for that, and then drive the car as well as they can, or would you like him to come in and tell you right away?
I would like him to try and compensate for that.
And then tell you it's there.
And then tell me I can't compensate enough, and here's what I need help with.
Perfect. So I think that's a good way to put it, right? So here we have.
But I'm helping him, and he's helping me.
Yes.
It's a group
effort. But he's tried his tools.
Yes, he's tried his tools.
So he's gone into his little folder, the PD folder, and he's looked at this type of corner.
He's run out of files.
And he's exactly.
Yes.
So here's kind of the cool. So here's how this all ties together. So this is kind of fun because we're getting there through engineering, which is neat.
Yeah.
But so there's this magical thing called flow, right? It's when a driver's in the zone and they're driving completely subconsciously because everything the car is doing is not surprising them. It's within the parameters in the folders.
Yes.
So that's where we want to end up, right? When the car is amazing, the driver is simpatico.
Yes.
And you can drive the car and think about what you're having for dinner. Actually, what you're really doing is contemplating racecraft consciously.
Yes.
Because we're only able to do one conscious thing at a time, but subconsciously, we can do a zillion things. Walking requires over 600 muscle firings, just walking. And you learned every muscle firing as a toddler, one at a time.
Yes.
Right?
Which is why it takes so long to learn how to walk, right?
Exactly.
Same thing when I was driving a race car.
So that's what we're doing. We're ingraining information in our file cabinet. Thank you again, PD. I think I've thanked him enough times now.
Yeah,
but I'm going to keep it. But so and you have enough in there so that, and the really simple way to think of it is you're not surprised. The car doesn't surprise you. Everything it does, you just simply fix and you compensate for. And then you come in, and then this is when Steve from our first podcast goes and ruins all of it because he found you more grip on one end.
Yes.
And you start this process again.
Yes.
But see, that's what I really wanted to nail down, right? Yes. I wanted to talk about this.
Yes.
Like, we're drivers and we're very subjective and we do everything by feel.
Yes.
The car has to feel right. It can't scare me. It has to have an operating window that I can actually deal with. That
you have to when manipulate the attitude the way you want it to.
Always.
With the tools
it's
that you
a
have.
Tool.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want that perfect turn in. And what I'm trying to do as a driver is I'm trying to be very efficient. So that's always the word that it should start off with. And I think people start with fast, but I think fast is a byproduct of efficient, right? If I'm using the car well, I'm making it turn efficiently, I'm balancing it correctly. And what that means is just a simple premise there. If you ever have understeer or oversteer, it's not the limit of the car. You have the car out of balance. Like at that moment, like if it understeers, you didn't have enough load on the front at that moment. If it oversteers, you didn't have load on the rear at that moment, right? Or you're rolling in the throttle too quickly because that could also cause oversteer in that particular instance.
Or understeer. If it's a
or understeer, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what makes it so much fun.
That's
what makes either one.
Yeah, so you're sort of chasing. But the thing is like the real limit of the car is when all four wheels, and then you're like, all four wheels slide. You're like, that's as quick as it'll go through here. You know, that's kind of the limit, but that's the perfectly balanced limit where the car has the load exactly where it needs to be, front to rear, and you're carving it into the corner on Steve's or someone hopefully that's 1/10 as good as Steve, which would be really good, is setting up your car and you're carving that thing through the corner. So that's the role of the driver. The whole time you're thinking ahead. So and as I suggested, this whole car, the car is being driven at its limit, right? Very, very precisely at its limit without big understeer or oversteer moments. And at the same time, you're consciously working on beating everybody. So now you're dealing with your racecraft. And you're manipulating, because that's what racing is. It's pure manipulation of these people you probably in most cases like, except for that one guy that his nationality has nothing to do with why you don't like him. But you generally respect other drivers, especially if they're fast. You're like, they earned their right to be here. So your job with the setup on the car that's hopefully a little gentler on the tires, and you that's a little gentler on the car, you're trying to figure out a way to weaken their position. You know, so you're trying to drive them a little harder. You're trying to throw them dummies and go a little inside or outside. You're doing all these things, and maybe there's one behind you trying to do the same thing to you. Maybe you're in a pack of 15 or 20 going at any given moment. And that's where racing is just absolutely off the charts, unbelievable.
Now let's talk about the limitations of the driver feedback for a moment.
All right.
Okay, so as a driver engineer's perspective. All right, so if you have a car that understeers a lot, okay, you get to a certain angle with the steering wheel and the front end stops responding.
Of course.
Okay. If
less grip when you turn more.
Yes. So if you reduce the understeer, the steering wheel still goes to the same angle before it gives it up, but it still understeers. You're just going a higher mile per hour.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can look at the data. The data will show you the steering wheel angle the same. It'll show you the understeer percentage change if you have an understeer or oversteer yaw channel built into your data, which I always do. The only way you can tell is that the mile per hour went up or down.
Yep. Lateral G too is
sometimes lateral G will change a little bit.
If the mile per hour went up.
Sometimes it won't even very much, or it's hard to tell the difference. Like the lines are like right on top of each other. And the driver feedback is it understeers, but he'll give you an understeer of a 4 or a 5. But then you'll reduce the understeer, it'll still be a 4 or 5. Reduce it again, it'll still be a 4 or a 5. And until you cross over to where it's oversteering, you don't actually know how much understeer you actually have.
Yes.
Same thing happens with oversteering car.
Yeah.
You can oversteer.
I think, but a driver could figure that out if they had a sensitivity.
I've never had a driver that can.
Well, I wait.
Not trying to be insulting.
He's had me as a driver. What just happened?
Including myself. Including myself.
I don't know.
I mean, sometimes you'll get an inkling, holy cow, this is terminal understeer, it's really bad. And the ESLs tell you that it's better and the car is going faster. But they don't really know how many steps you are away from the transition from understeer to oversteer. You can't feel that.
I think that you're going to try and kill it instantly. I'm going to try and kill it.
With all your tools, it still understeers. And
well, then it's not a 1 or a 2.
No, it's a 5.
So that's a scale. Yeah, the scale. So we have a scale, right? So like if it's neutral, you'd say like it's at a 0, right?
Yeah.
So like we have a 1 or a 2 understeer means really mild understeer. So if you were to drive that car around a skid pad, it barely slides the front tires before the rear tires, barely, right? And then as you go up this scale to 5, where now going around the skid pad, your front tires are at the cusp of understeer or understeer, and your rear tires are maybe like at 80% of their maximum grip, not at 99 like the understeer one. And with the same scale for oversteer going in the other direction.
But you'll mostly see a mile per hour change, and believe it or not, a tire pressure temperature change, because it'll grind the front tires less. And that's the data. That's the data you have to work,
right? Like too much steering angle.
But the problem is when you get to a certain steering angle, let's call it 30 degrees, the tire goes over center, it just washes out.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so if a car understeers a lot, it will do that, and reduce the understeer. The speed will go up, but you'll still get the same steering angle, because the driver will keep adding steering wheel until nothing happens.
Right.
He'll get to the same angle, and when it gives up, he'll stop.
Right.
Yes, I don't feel anymore.
Because I don't want
so
to
you
turn
look at the steering
anymore.
angle, and the data and the steering angle is exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay.
He's just going a higher speed.
Now I understand. So as you're reducing understeer, it still looks the same from a steering angle, but you'll see the speed ticking up on the corner, meaning you're reducing understeer.
Possibly a small change in lateral Gs.
Okay. Cool. I'm with you now.
But what always happens to me is this is an interesting point, is how I determined in recent years I've learned to determine track asymmetry this way. Like how much cross weight do I want? How much camber split do I want in the car?
So you're playing because you want to play with vertical load on that outside front to try and kill.
What I'm doing is I'm saying if a tire temperature on the outside is a lot higher than the inside, or the tire pressure has to start lower to get to the same hot running pressure,
right?
The track has more asymmetry than I thought. Or if the tire pressures and temperature equal left and right, has less asymmetry than I thought, and I will change my crossweight, camber split, tilt of the car based on the tire pressure feedback. And I will also use the tire pressure and temperature feedback and how much understeer or oversteer do I have. Okay, because if one end of the car is giving up a lot more the other car, that end will be hotter. And so what you'll do is all weekend long, you'll start with a cold tire pressure that gets you to a hot target pressure, which is what you're after.
Right.
If you have a handling problem, when you finally fix the handling problem, all your tire pressure notes are wrong.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely.
Because the end that was too hot is now cold, the end that was too cold is now hotter, and then you have to...
Yeah.
And so sometimes you'll go into a race, you're going, well, I think I know where I am.
It. Yeah. and if I did, this is going to happen.
And you'll be a half a pound or a pound off, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot in a race car. So then you'll have set 2 and set 3. We'll have tire pressure monitoring on the car. On the big cars we have telemetry. So I can watch the tire pressure go up and down during the lap. That's also really interesting too, by the way.
Yeah.
Before I had telemetry, I didn't realize how dynamic tire pressure was. But like the Lamborghini, for example.
You think it's like gently just grows over a session and then stabilizes, but no, it's...
Oh my God, the Lamborghini has huge vents through the wheel well and big exits in the back, and it just flows a ton of air to the wheel well. The GT4 car doesn't do it as much because it's sealed like a
So that made a big difference in tire temp and pressure.
And down the straightaway, you would lose 1.5 pounds of pressure. So let's say optimal grip occurs at 26.5 pounds,
right,
say, or 28, pick a number, 28. You go down the straightaway, it goes down to 26.5. You turn into the corner, and it's actually too low for a maximum grip. Does it get to 28 when you get to the apex?
Yeah. And so you'd have complaining about turn into apex that you're scratching your head about, not realizing your tire pressure is just too low.
Right.
The car's great on the exit.
Right. So
what it ought to be.
What we're always doing is we want the tire pressure to hit the optimal number in the center of the corner.
Yeah.
Not get too hot by the exit, not be too cold on the entrance.
Yeah.
And how much straight air do I have, and what is the ambient
talk about
temperature?
corner phases. This is interesting.
God.
Yeah, this just went complicated. Like I was talking about chess and its 4 billion set moves.
Now think about a Formula car with open tires.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Think how much a Formula 1 IndyCar tire probably cools the tire down Australia, and they're always talking about, does it fire my tires up? Like the Ferrari fires its tires up really quickly.
Yeah.
But it overheats them and has bad tire deg.
Good qualifying, poor race.
Right. And the Red Bull seems to do both for some reason.
And the McLaren is like the Ferrari.
And by the way, it has to do with how much air you're flowing around the tire. What is the mass of the wheel itself? How much air are you pumping through the wheel? Is the wheel cooling the tire?
I remember
the brakes are heating up by, and it's such a just that alone is such a complex equation.
Exactly.
You could spend your entire life on just that.
They have 10 engineers on that in a Formula One team.
Yeah.
I remember Mercedes, maybe like 18, 19, but they came up with a new inner rib design, just for cooling of the tire.
Yes.
Not for the brake, like for the tire cooling.
Yes. I mean, the heat transfers from the tire into the wheel, but also from the brakes into the wheel.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
And you can use it.
And then the air flows over the brakes and out the wheel, and it also flows over the bodywork and through the wheel well.
Yeah.
So you're cooling it from the center and you're cooling it from the outside simultaneously.
Yeah.
And now in the tire pressure monitor, we also have a core temperature. So it tells you the temperature inside the tire.
Right. Like not surface temperature, but within.
Right, and what's interesting too is we found that if when we were qualifying back the same race at Mid-Ohio, I was trying to squeak a little bit of time to get the pole from the Aston Martin, and I raised the tire pressure a lot in qualifying, so the pressure would be higher sooner because the tires were coming in, pretty quick. But it turns out that I raised it so much that the core temperature wasn't up, and the tires didn't have as much grip because the core temperature was low, even if the surface temperature was right.
Right. Holy cow. Yeah, so, I mean it all makes sense. It's just having the ability to actually measure all of that and see trends.
Yes.
And then you get strategies.
Yes.
That can anticipate that.
But the point we started with, and I kind of digressed on you, is that sometimes there's things a driver can't see.
Yeah.
That the data can see.
That's
Some kinds of things that the driver can see that the data can't.
Trust the process.
Sometimes they will agree with each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes they will disagree with each other. And parsing through all that.
Yeah. Well, you just have to have a good relationship again to be able to get through that. That's why the
relationship is so important, and the person has to be able to articulate.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I did write a blog about this that's not in the book because there was like 6 or 7 or 8 things I thought about afterwards. But one of them was this thing I called passive overdriving, where I just found a lot of drivers drive with mild understeer all the time and don't even realize it. They think that's like the limit. Mm-hmm. And they're actually not getting to like right where the optimum slip angle is. They're actually getting a little bit over.
Yeah.
And they hold there and they drive like that all the time. All the time. And so that kind of that was me. Well, a little bit.
Alonso likes a lot of understeer. And it's interesting.
And so did Prost, and they were drivers. There always have been drivers like that.
No, some drivers like a free car. Some drivers like a tight car. I've always liked a tight car, and I find I can manipulate a tight car and get more lap time out of it.
Yes, if it's only number one. And
I'm only talking 1 or 2 understeer, not talking 4 or 5.
Exactly. So let's talk. Let's hold on. Let's explain that for a second because I think it's kind of cool.
Back to Alonso warming tires.
All right. Because I love that. Yeah. But the thing about that is like. So if you have this, you never want to design the car to be neutral, like driving around the skid pad. You don't want it to be neutral unless your job is to go around the skid pad. Well, because that car on trailing throttle or on braking is going to be very loose. Yep. And that car is going to be really difficult to race because the thing, like, you might be able to qualify with a car like that. And absolutely, actually, you can. You can qualify the car like that as long as you don't overheat the rears before the lap is over. That's going to be a really quick car. But racing is different because you get checked up in racing all the time mid-corner. So once you're in that pack, you're going to get suddenly slowed down. The driver is going to try and surprise you, and they're going to try and brake check you so they get a better run out of the corner. They're just going to kind of breathe in and roll out really quick. Especially on the last lap, you see a lot of things like this. If they know you're attacking, they're going to try and throw your rhythm off. Mm-hmm. Throwing your rhythm off means getting you to check up, and checking up means getting out of the gas or maybe adding a little bit of brake on the way in. And if your car is neutral, it's going to snap on you. If it snaps on you, that's going to cost you a lot of time. And that time is not worth it. So you try and set a car up with a sort of number 1 understeer, maybe number 2.
I like a number 2.
He's a number 2. I'm a more number 1.
No, you like a free car. That's how we met, actually.
Yeah.
I watched him drive a car free, and I go, boy, I don't see how I can hang on to that thing. And he was blisteringly fast. And I said, I have to go over and meet him. So I went over and introduced myself. I said,
that was how it started.
That's how it started. I said, man, you've got some car control.
And
I'm
you're
very
wrong
impressed.
about your setup.
I didn't say that.
No, you didn't.
I did. I told you the red car had like shit. And you go, yes, I agree.
Yeah, it was terrible. Well, that car had so much. That car had number 5 understeer all the time.
It did.
And so I had
to
fling it sideways.
And you were making a turn.
And make it work.
And I was impressed, by the way.
Somehow we did well like that. But so you want to have this mild understeer in the car, and see. So the whole point of this number 1 or number 2 understeer is that you can make the car rotate with trail brake anytime you want it to.
Yeah.
But if you get checked up in a corner, it only goes from mild understeer to maybe neutral, not to oversteer.
Yes.
And then you don't have to give up corner speed, because an important thing to remember, as soon as you go into countersteer, your overall car grip plummets. You've got less grip. If you just go to neutral, all 4 tires are still kind of pointing in the right direction, the slip angles are all working, you're not losing corner speed until you go countersteer.
Which is why it's important to make a lot of small corrections in a corner instead of big ones
when they get small, we get to call them adjustments.
Yes. If you make a lot of very small adjustments to keep the car controlled in yaw, you'll get a lot more speed and a lot less tire temperature.
Bam. So that's kind of
the
why
skill you learn, because what amateurs do, or people don't have a lot of driving skills, they wait too long to make a correction. The correction's too big, and they're almost always behind the correction.
It looks like a jagged line.
Yes.
This is the limit.
Or if you look at a pro, the steering wheels, just looks like a sawtooth on a hacksaw blade.
And to an uninitiated or untrained eye, you're like, it looks kind of boring. But to them, they're just carefully balancing this car always at the limit.
And by the way, Pruitt was amazing at what you're talking about. When he had a lead and someone was behind him and his tire deg was too high or he just didn't have enough pace, he was magical at protecting the inside, slowing the car in the apex, and getting on the throttle before the person behind him, so he could hold them off down there. And I've seen him do it for like a half an hour, where he kept somebody 5 car lanes behind him with just pure finesse.
Yeah,
just pure finesse.
That's it.
And Scott Pruitt.
And just frustrate. And then what he'll do, he's just like frustrate you. You're like overdriving to try and make something happen, and then you run your tires out in the process, and then after that, he just drives away from you. You know?
Phenomenal guy behind the wheel of a car, by the way.
But hopefully you're seeing some of the stuff we're talking about here with the driver and kind of the window they operate within. You know, we want them to have a great relationship with the engineer. They want them to be able to communicate with the car. They need to be a good test driver, which means when Steve needs to know when a change makes a difference, you need to do the same thing over and over again on those practice laps if you have the time to do that. And then when you're a race driver, that's when you change hats. And it's like all bets are off. It's just like we talked about in the first podcast where we're like, that's when we'll de-grip the wrong end of the car to make things just better for the race. And that's the same time a race car driver will go, you know what? I'm going to drive around any problem now. We just need to have the best race we can have. And so that's where the mentality changes during the race. We're trying to show up with the best, most precise, best handling car, the best compromise possible for this car, this race, this day, and then I'm going to try and drive it as efficiently as possible. But then we get in the race, and of course, the car's constantly changing. Heck, we just described how the tire pressure changes through a single corner. So the car's set up and balance is always changing. So we're always reaching into our file folder there, and we're compensating because, as we said on the prior podcast, you know, you're probably not going to have the same balance through a run. You never will, actually.
You never will, no.
So our job as a driver is to optimize the car's balance as the tires go through their life. And you're either wearing out front tires faster or rear tires faster in most cases, and therefore you're going to go from an understeering car to an oversteering car or vice versa.
I'd like to talk about how where the engine is placed affects that. But before I do that, I want to talk about Alonso.
Alonso's warm-up.
So the most impressive, back when Alonso was world champion a long time ago.
Right.
I used to watch Benetton days. I used to watch him warm up tires. I don't know if you remember this.
That car was such a cheater car. You know, they proved all that, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay, it doesn't matter.
They were very skilled people. But anyway.
He calls them very skilled.
Regardless of what was in the car, I don't even know what he's talking about. But Alonso would do this thing where when you lightly accelerate with a mid-engine or rear-engine car, you have a lot of weight over the rear wheels. The car understeers, right? And he would drive around the warm-up lap before the start of the race with slight throttle and
he's just jerking the wheel back and forth.
And the reason he would do this is when you have a front engine or rear wheel, we have a rear engine or mid-engine car.
Yeah.
The rear tires will heat up faster than the front because you're applying power with them. and it's hard to get the front tires lit. And when the race starts, you now have an understeering car,
Absolutely.
and 3 or 4 people pass
Yeah.
you. So what he would do is he would force temperature to the front tire.
Yep.
If you, even to this day, when a race turns green, he always makes a move. You notice how many positions he makes up? Even if he has the exact same car as his teammate.
He's the guy with the warmest front tires on the grid.
He always makes up more positions every restart than everyone else. There's hardly a time he
Great in
doesn't
the wet.
start where he doesn't pass somebody, only because he gets the front tires lit more than I believe. I've never talked to him. I don't know him.
Remember the DAS system?
It's just an observation on my part.
Yeah, no, it's true. I remember him doing that.
Yeah.
Go watch YouTube videos of him doing that. There probably are.
And that's just to get the front tires hot, so when the race starts, the front ones are almost as hot as the back ones. So when you come to the first corner, the car will turn.
Exactly.
Then you don't have to overslow.
Which you see him run wide, turn 1 all the time. You remember the DAS system Mercedes had like 3 years ago?
Yeah.
So the steering wheel that went in and out, and it changed the front toe.
Yeah.
So they could just grind the front tires along.
That was the point of that.
To warm up the front tires.
He would just do it by just doing this.
And it was great because those cars, the Mercedes was really gentle on its tires, which meant long runs, it was super, it's like everything you could ever want. But it took forever to warm its tires up.
Yeah.
So that was a problem. So the DAS system was a way to put heat in the front tires, because you can easily heat the rears just by lighting them up.
Yeah.
But that was like a clever anti-Alonso
solution.
I mean, but I mean,
I'm a big Alonso fan.
I like him too. I like him too. He's not so good out of the car. He tends to make everyone angry.
I heard that.
He hops from team to team to team. But brilliant
he's got
driver.
mad skills.
Brilliant driver.
So let's talk about weight distribution, how it affects setup, if you don't mind
love that.
for a second. Okay.
Well, we're supposed to be talking about drivers, but go ahead.
I know,
you really want to do this.
This has to do with the effect with the driver as well.
Let's go.
Okay, so if you have a front engine car like a BMW, and I've spent a lot of time with those. In the last few years, I've raced Audis and Lamborghinis on mid-engine. They have significantly different characteristics and require a different setup.
Yes, of course.
Yes, and this may be obvious, but front engine cars have a tendency to understeer a lot more. And they have a tendency not to put power down as well.
Yes.
Okay, particularly on corner entry understeer, and then power exit oversteer.
Yeah.
Okay, and mid-engine cars have a tendency to oversteer on corner entry.
Yes.
And understeer on corner exit.
Yes.
Yes.
And well, we can go even more basic and say ideally, because you can look at Formula One cars or prototypes or any purpose-built race cars, and the ideal weight distribution is usually somewhere within a couple of percentage points of 45-55.
I agree with
front
that.
to rear.
Some people say 60-40, but I believe 45-55.
That's what 911s are,
but that's also has a lot of polar moment as well, because the engine's so far back.
But the problem with that is they're demons under braking.
Yep.
And they're demons putting power down, but they're damn slow to the apex.
Yes.
So that's what you're kind of
hard to slow yourself down. And what's weird is, if I could digress here for a second about track day cars, a lot of customers buy GT3 Porsches for track day cars.
Yes.
You know, because they have the money.
Ooh, that reminds me. We need to talk about
really
stability control too. I want to talk about
that. And Porsche is a coveted race car company.
Great, and they build great cars.
But honestly, they are hard cars to drive fast because of the engine location. And
Cayman GT4.
Yeah.
Mid-engine.
Yeah.
Handles better.
Right now, no, it doesn't.
You're not super. Yeah, that's right. He just finished with those.
I'm not a fan.
Hey, we haven't talked about it. New race car coming.
Yes.
Talk about your new race car.
Yeah, we're switching from. We ran the Audi for a few years, then the Lamborghini, then we switched to a Porsche. One of my sponsors liked Porsche, so we bought one. We bought 3 of them actually.
It's kind of BOP though, isn't it? Why you didn't like it?
No.
Okay.
No.
You want to give any more insight?
I don't want to say anything bad about Porsche, but let's put it this way: it's too much of a street car, not enough of a race car, and they didn't, because it was Porsche, in my opinion. They didn't need to do anything.
And do they BOP it to competitiveness?
Yeah. Yes. If it were at the right weight, the car would be competitive.
Right.
And we actually almost finished third at the first race, but we had a tire failure and some other Porsche finished second. So the car can be competitive. The BOP can always be adjusted up and down to make any car competitive. It just has a lot of things about it that make it difficult from a raceability standpoint.
Because as we were describing, like turning a road car into a race car, this is sort of that same topic.
Yes,
it isn't as adjustable as you'd like or as user friendly as you'd like.
The BMW folks went through all the things that made the street car not a good race car and made it into a race car, and the Porsche goes, well, it's a Porsche, we don't have to do anything.
I think that's a perfect summary.
I just give you one.
It's probably 100% accurate.
I just give you one little example. It's nothing about the performance of the car. It's a fun car. They have the radiators in the front corners.
Yes.
Okay. And every time you touch somebody,
touch anything.
It springs a leak.
Touch anything.
I mean, you couldn't. It'd be very difficult to win a championship because every race there's a Porsche DNFs because of a water leak in the front of the car.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know what BMW did? They put push bars around the radiator.
That's impossible to do on a Porsche because they're perfect as they come from the factory.
I know. And so if you hit somebody with a BMW, it knocks them out of the way and it doesn't damage the radiator. But not only that, they attach the radiator to the push bar, so the push bar is bent and moves the radiator out of the way. Okay. This doesn't mean the BMW is a better car than the Porsche. That's not what I'm trying to say.
That's what he's saying.
Okay. What I'm saying is, when you have cars that are this close,
yeah.
that's the problem with BOP racing, is the cars are super close. You can't get a giant advantage. You can get a few tenths is the best you can do if you're doing a really good job.
So
right?
they're going to run into each other while racing.
At some point, you're gonna rub. And
yeah.
you want a car that will rub and keep its alignment,
and not lose the water out of its cooling
system. And not lose the water out of the cooling. That's the other thing, is the BMW can bounce it off stuff. You put it back in the setup.
They still have, BMW still have the toe links issue, or are they okay?
That's all been solved.
That's good, because that was a
It was a problem with the old one. That's all fixed. So you can take a BMW, you can whack it into something, put it on the setup pad, and it's still straight.
Oh.
You touch anybody with the Porsche, the alignment and the corner weights are off.
Yeah.
So the problem is your competitors know that the car is vulnerable to contact.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I've certainly been
they hit
the
you
victim
on purpose
of that.
just to take you out. And so the Porsche could be a phenomenal race car if Porsche made it more raceable,
more robust, and more
durable.
Yeah.
And it just isn't. Now, that's also part of the reason it's really fun to drive. It's light.
Yeah.
It's super light. And they don't want to add a lot of mass to it to make it more durable. But because it's light, it's fragile.
Yes. So, I mean, and that's another compromise, right?
Yes.
So it's just
my crew is named it the Play-Doh car. Because every time you bump it, it moves. They're not a fan.
It's not what you want in a race
car. Because we have an
car.
entire truck worth of parts. That's the other problem with the Porsche. It's very expensive to race. All the Porsche are expensive because it's Porsche parts.
Yeah.
And the car needs a lot of parts because it's constantly being bent.
Yes, and they make money off those radiators.
Yes, and so you're spending thousands of dollars a day fixing little things that honestly you should be able to just race and not have to fix.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
You know,
so you've got two new GT4s.
One right now,
that
two,
are
BMW, two more on the way.
And they're based on the M4?
Mm-hmm. Two-wheel drive.
And that's in Michelin Pilot Cup?
Michelin Pilot, yeah.
And
Michelin Pilot Challenge.
Michelin
GT4.
Pilot Challenge. Yeah. GT4 cars.
Yeah, so we're racing this year.
And they're debuting in a couple weeks.
At Indy.
In Indy.
At the Brickyard, yeah.
Cool.
So we still have the Porsche, so we're racing the Porsche with a second pair of drivers. And then my primary driver has been in the championship the whole year, switching to the BMW for the last 2 rounds.
And he gets to keep points and all that? Because I heard you say that with the Core when they switched to the Aston Martin.
You're allowed to change cars once a year, manufacturers once a year, and keep your points.
That's pretty cool.
So you can't have 5 cars and pick the best car that weekend because, well, that's why they had to make the rule.
Yeah.
Because of.
Is that a Steve rule?
No, that's a level 5 rule.
Oh, that would be a level. That would be a level 5 rule.
Yeah, yeah. So,
money is no object.
In the old days, if you were rich enough, and this is a disadvantage for poor people, which I usually was as a race car driver, was a poor person.
Me too.
Because I used to build my own race cars, build my own engines, set them up, and drive them myself. Because all I had was $1.95, and I wanted to go racing. Right? I couldn't afford all the career. Right? That's why I learned so much. But people used to buy multiple cars, and if this car was faster at this racetrack, they'd race this one, and this racetrack, this one. And if you're rich enough to have 3 or 4 race cars, well, now you have to race the same car all year, and you're allowed to change one time, but you can't change back.
Okay.
So it's a permanent change.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
And that way, if you just decide you lost your sponsor, or you have a sponsor that likes a certain car, you just decide you hate this car for whatever the reason might be, we think the Porsche is a fantastic car, but we're switching because we think the raceability of the BMW is better, and it's difficult to win a championship in the Porsche.
So we were talking about the BMW, and you were saying it's more prone to understeer. We were talking about weight distribution. Yeah. So you want to finish your thought on?
Yeah. So I've raced a lot of BMW. I raced BMWs for 34 years, and then I got into prototype cars, and then Lamborghinis and Audis and Porsches. Right. But I learned how to race a BMW, and it was good for me because I didn't start at 8 years old in a go-kart.
Same here.
I started at 29 years old as a race car driver.
I started at 24, so
yeah, okay.
I was bad. You were worse.
Yeah. And what I liked about the BMW is first of all, they have really good feel, but they're also super benign on the limit. Like they understeer a little bit when you lift off gas. They understeer a little bit less.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a kind of a nice thing because it makes them easy
to drive.
Yeah, really easy.
They don't put down power well.
Right.
As the miniature cars, so you have to carry a lot of entrance speed, and you carry a lot of apex speed, and where they really dominate or where they're really strong, I guess dominate's not the right word, is fast corners. Yeah. Because the front weight distribution makes the car stable like a dart.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
And when you're in a high speed,
good high speed stability,
super good high speed. You can roll apex speed at high speed like will blow your mind. Like when I used to race against Price Cobb and Elliott Forbes Robinson. You probably recognize those names. And also David Murray.
Yeah, I know him really well actually.
And Mauro Baldi, and those are my guys back in my day. And they were all in Porsches, and I was in a BMW. And Price Cobb's a famous race car driver, won the Daytona, good friend of mine. We're the same age. he would kill me on the brakes. And I go, how does he stop that way? But then I would catch him on the apex of every corner. I got him. I'm going to pass him on the straight. But then he'd put down twice as much power as me and pull 4 more car lengths on the exit of the corner. I go, no, I'm not going to pass him down the other straight. And this was every single lap. So I spent...
Strengths and weaknesses.
He won the championship, and then Dave Murray won the championship, and I was literally typically second, third, or fourth. I was probably missing a quarter of a second of actual raw lap time just from not having enough experience. And so I never could quite match him in speed, but I could always stay in contact and watch them.
Right.
Right. Which is a little frustrating. Yeah. Right? I never won a race and world challenge. I've won a lot of races, but I never won a race and world challenge. I spent seconds, thirds, fourths, and fifths over and over and over again every week, and it was kind of frustrating. And I would watch how their car would make lap time versus how my car would make lap time. But the one place I could kill Price was like the kink at Road America, the fast corners at Mosport. Like if you give me a corner that was over 100 miles an hour, I could just about push him down the road.
Because you got to think about like how nervous a Porsche is with its
and these were 993s.
Rear end hanging off.
These were 993s.
Yeah, I remember those cars. Yeah, I remember those cars. And so that's kind of to your point about weight distribution.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a fundamental definer for a car. And it doesn't actually even have to be whether it's mid-engine or front engine. That's usually what does it. But like for the Mercedes GT4 or GT3 and even the road car, it's front engined, but it's 47 front, 53 rear.
Yeah. And that's because the entire engine's behind the front.
Yeah, and it's
the BMW is a 6-cylinder.
And it's a transaxle too. So
the BMW is 54 front because the engine hangs out over the front end. It's got turbos with intercoolers and radiators. It's got like 9 heat exchangers in the front of the car or something ridiculous like that. So it is so nose heavy. They left the lead acid battery in the trunk to make the weight distribution better.
Like
we do that in a race car.
We're not doing a lithium.
What's the point? It needs the weight back there anyway, right?
We're just going to put some lead back there anyway.
And they also did a really cool thing. They moved the driver's seat all the way back till it hits where your feet would be on the back seat.
Right.
And they made the steering column like this much longer.
That's like my Pikes Peak car we're building. It's like I'm sitting in the back seat.
So you're driving from the back. Old Trans Am cars were that way too.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's all good. So that's another point to make about cars is the defining characteristics of how a car will handle have more to do with weight distribution, and then the one other factor you get in there is like polar moment.
Yep.
So is it carrying the weight on two ends? Think like Porsche 944 transaxle front engine car, or things like that, or like the AMG Mercedes where it's a transaxle car but the engine's behind the front wheel, so it has more mid-engine weight distribution even though it's front engine.
Yep.
Or then you shift into a mid-engine car like a Corvette or a Cayman type car or a Lamborghini or a McLaren or any of those mid-engine type cars, Ferraris, and then rear-engine cars. That are more like a 40-60 weight distribution, which is more like what you'd see with a Porsche.
But the point where I was headed with this, you take the least skilled drivers, and then they buy the hardest car to drive.
That was your original point. You're right. The GT3
because it's a very track-worthy car. Porsche makes the car with a lot of.
It's a ripper. Yeah.
It's a ripper. It's fast.
Amazing engine.
It's got a wing on. It's got a great motor. The camber and everything's adjustable with shims and lower control arms.
You can dial now on the new one. Do you see what's on the steering wheel on the new one?
Yeah.
Differential and rebound and compression on dials on the wheel.
I know. Yeah. So
and
Porsche did a phenomenal job with the car, but it still has the motor behind the.
Yeah, they're inching it forward though.
I know, but it's still
too far back.
It's still too far back, and so you get a person who's not very well disciplined, like you or like any professional driver, and you have to slightly overslow the car to the apex.
Absolutely.
So you can square up and use the power and use the brakes no way in. And if you try and roll too much speed and then stay off the throttle, and here's what happens with an amateur when they carry too much speed. And the car starts to go sideways, they're afraid to get back on the throttle to settle the car. So they just chase the car until they spin out or go off the road. When the right thing to do is you give it a little bit of throttle, it settles the back of the car a little bit. But because
they think the wheel a little straighter, and then you can go.
Because they think they're already going too fast, they don't come back on the
throttle. Again, it's thinking oversteer is the limit, and it's just they're just not balanced.
Because they're not balanced, like you were talking about earlier. So if you give it a little bit of throttle, even though you're going too fast, the car will settle and roll to the speed faster.
I always found
where the BMW, you can stay off the throttle, and it just understeers less.
Yes.
That was my point.
Yeah, that makes it easier.
And for a person who wasn't a professional race car driver at the age of 8 in a go-kart, the benign characteristics of the BMW and the limit made it so I was actually fast.
So basically, someone rolls it up in an M4. And someone rolls up in a GT3 with the same given skill level as a driver, the M4 driver is probably going to be much more comfortable, much quicker, and probably progress sooner.
Yes.
So I want to talk about stability and traction control.
Doesn't mean
the
Porsche's not going to be faster in the end.
Absolutely not.
That's
not what we're talking about.
But you need to put a pro behind the car.
That's
right.
It's a whole different thing.
Right.
So that's the other thing where you do have cars that are kind of experts cars when you're driving. I always thought that a car would pull its peak G through a corner when its vertical load matched its weight distribution. What do you think?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
So in other words, like you've got all these phases, and you've got a car that's good mid-corner, you've got a car that's good in a high-speed corner, you've got a car that's good at putting power down out of a corner. So depending on where its weight distribution is. So as you're kind of rocking through your corner, and you're doing your certain amount of trail brake for a certain car. So let's say like when you're in the BMW, that it's quickest middle of the corner.
Okay.
Like that's where it excels. So if you looked at it versus
fast in the middle of the corner,
so you looked at it versus any of the other cars and the other engine configurations and therefore weight distributions you could get, that's its thing. It's mid-corner speed.
Yeah, it doesn't brake
really
as
good.
well. It doesn't power as well.
Exactly.
Mid-corner speed is the best.
So then you get into like, let's say a front-wheel drive car that has all of its weight on its nose, right? And that thing it's going to be quicker. Like what it's good at is entry.
Yep.
Because you can trail brake the hell out of that thing.
Yeah.
It'd have a 911 would have spun off a mile ago. A Ferrari would have spun off half a mile ago.
Yeah.
But this thing, oh boy, you can stay on the brake and just pin the nose.
Yeah.
And it loves it because it's so nose heavy.
Yes.
And so that's where it's going to be happiest is that pinned moment at entry. It's going to be really fast from turn into apex.
Yes. Let's talk about what amateurs do to cars that make them handle worse.
Well, we can do let's go there.
So where a car will make the most lateral G's is when you've come off of the brake, but you haven't applied throttle yet.
Yeah, that little moment.
That little moment, because the front is pinned. You have a lot of rake in the car. I
wrote a paper on that moment. I haven't done anything with it yet. I should send it to you.
So you have a maximum aerodynamic pressure on the car because it has a lot of rake in the car. You're not binding the car with the brakes. You haven't given it any throttle. You haven't unloaded the
front end.
And
the load hasn't transferred yet.
The load hasn't transferred yet. You've turned the steering wheel. The car will. That's when you get the car to carve to the apex.
See, I called that transitional redirect. It was this moment.
Well, that's the same difference.
There's a couple of there's the moment. Okay, so think about it like this. You know when we were talking about adjusting for the limit?
Yes.
Okay, so every moment where you go below,
yes,
there's a moment to turn the car more.
Yes.
That's something good drivers instinctively do.
Grab another handful of steering wheel.
That's it. So I think that's cool.
But what amateurs,
whenever you overslow, like whenever you, for whatever reason, if you get bogged down by Scott Pruitt in front of you, you'll crank the wheel like point so I can get on the gas earlier. Right. So that's a cool distinction. I'm glad you brought that up. That's kind of fun because I wrote a thing about it because I'm like, I don't know that anyone's ever really talked about this. It's funny that you spontaneously just go, hey, there's this moment. I'm like, hey, wait a minute.
Well, here's the problem. I've dealt with a lot of pro-am driver combinations where I have a pro at the end and an amateur starts. The amateur brings some money along, and they're usually pretty good. I mean, we have one right now is like within 3 or 4 tenths of Jeff. He's pretty strong. He's raced a lot of horses.
That's good.
Yeah, he's very good. Nice man, too. Really, really nice guy, Sean. Anyway, what all amateurs do, and he doesn't do it very much, is they overslow the car in entry because they're afraid the car is going to spin.
Yes.
And then before they grab that handful steering wheel, they start to apply throttle. And then
go to throttle.
The front end understeer.
Yep.
Now
and
they can't get to the car to the apex. They complain of understeer. And they keep squeezing
This
throttle.
Is everyone.
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 Okay?
Literally everyone.
Yes. Literally everyone.
We just say overslow.
And then they're wide on the exit because the car's not pointed. And then they're feeding the throttle in slowly. It takes them a long time to get the watt, where the pro behind them carries more speed in, pins the nose, grabs an extra handful of steering wheel to square the car up. He's on the gas at watt. Lets the pause happen. He's on the throttle at watt. He's driving by you on the inside while you're you're doing this, trying to not
I would always describe that as if you unwind the wheel, like literally like 0.2 of a second before you go to throttle, the car will be happy.
Yes.
If you try to go to throttle at the same time, or you try to go to throttle before, it will understeer.
It took me,
and it's the tiniest fraction of freaking time, like you wouldn't believe it. But the thing about human beings, we love to synchronize things. So when we got off the brake, we like to go to throttle, like because again, it just
off the brake, turn the wheel, then go to throttle, and then unwind, and then go to throttle. Right?
Yeah, it's. I mean, we're talking about tenths of a second here that make a functionally huge difference to the balance of the car. And then when they come in and complain about it, and this is they don't have Steve. What they do is they make the car looser to compensate for the understeer, and they end up with this oversteering car that is really slow from turn into apex and is unraceable because every time someone checks up in front of you, you spin it.
Yeah, and they cause the problem.
They cause the problem.
It took me 10 years as a race car driver to grasp this.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I was the person that I didn't overslow the car. I actually had no problem carrying speed in. but I was always impatient when to get in the throttle.
Yes.
And so I didn't have the overslow. I would trail brake in and use the weight of the BMW just to get the car to turn like I wanted to. But then I wouldn't grab the last handful of steering wheel and unwind before I went to throttle. I would start to apply throttle with the wheel in, and I would chase the throttle all the way to the exit of the car and then drop a wheel in the dirt on the way out, trying to roll as much speed out of the corner, thinking I was a brave hero because I could drop the wheel in the dirt and not lose control of the car and stay on the gas.
Right.
And that was a good skill, by the way.
He did all that in one breath, by the way. Good breath control.
So it's very hard to, especially at altitude.
Yeah, exactly. I almost had to give him CPR.
So I mean, when I amateurs almost always tell me the car understeers on the throttle.
Oh, that always. So this is really common,
okay,
and it's really cool that you brought it up, and then we got to kind of talk about it for a few minutes.
Yes.
So okay, so I think we're getting close on time here.
We are,
and I want to talk about now, and this segues perfectly from what we've been talking about, because this is the last piece of this driving puzzle, I think, over what we've chatted about thusly, and that is stability and traction control. That is driver aids.
Yeah.
Because your 911 GT3 guy, that's what he does. So he doesn't spin the car to track day because he keeps all the systems on.
Yeah, but it's slowing him down.
It's slowing him down. It's also, here's the bad thing about these systems. So the good news is it keeps you on the track.
That is good.
That is, I mean, and that's really good.
Lower cost day.
It's a $180,000 plus car.
The question is, can you drive the car without setting it off?
So yes.
I know you had it.
I hate him so much.
Sorry.
So much.
Steeler
over here.
If you don't bind the car up,
yes,
it won't turn on. And you can leave it on it, but you don't use it.
They get used to that little flashy light all the time, and they start ignoring it. And so now they're doing any damn thing into the corner, and the car's saving them every time, and they're driving it every time. And so they will start to form habit doing that.
Yep.
And they will have very bad technique. And if they ever jump in anything that doesn't have stability and traction control, whether it's a benign BMW or a hard-to-drive Porsche, it doesn't matter. They are going to struggle mightily with this car because they don't have this granular feel of how they're responsible for the balance of the vehicle. They've been relying on these electronic systems for doing this the whole time. ABS is the same way. Traction control is the same way out of the corner. You're not going to have a feel for digressive braking if all you're doing is mashing on the brake and getting into the ABS. You're going to have a very hard time developing a very sort of beautiful, perfectly timed and synced with your steering input and where you're going and how fast you're going, so your rate of turn, all those things needs that perfect brake release for that particular corner, that moment, to make the car transition from straightaway to effectively carving through the corner, right? And so use those things carefully because they are a shortcut, but they are also a shortcut to mediocrity, where you're never going to be really technically a good driver, let alone a great driver, no matter how fast your car is with that system on going around the racetrack. It ain't yours till you own it, until you're driving it with those systems off. You need to do that in tiny little steps. You get in certain cars, they're very good. Those systems can actually be defeated level by level. The Mercedes stuff that I have, they have a 2-setting stability control and a 9-setting traction control.
That's awesome.
Which is really cool on the AMG stuff, on some of their more track-focused stuff. So think about that, but here's the way I would end this whole driver thing, and that is go to a school. Do not learn to drive in a club setting. You'll build bad habits. You need professional instruction by people that understand all these things Steve and I have been talking about for the last hour and a half. And what they're trying to do, club level racing is designed to be safe. And safety is great. We're very concerned about safety in motorsports. The reason these two old guys are still up here talking right now is because we've obviously been either really lucky or pretty good at the safety thing, right? Because we made it through
I've rolled a couple cars up into a ball. Not very many, but a couple times.
It's not a good, not helping, Steve, not helping.
So but the safety equipment works good.
Yeah, but the safety equipment works. So what you want to do is you go to a school, you know, like AMG Academy, or you go to a Skip Barber, or you go to some sort of school, Jim Russell, a professional school, a Level Up. There's several different schools that are operating, and you go and you jump in a very lightweight, which we've been talking about, very direct, without power steering or power brakes or any of that thing, a little formula car that's like a go-kart, but just kind of slightly bigger, weighs 1,000 pounds, very quick around a racetrack, very challenging to drive. Everything that car does is on you. There's no electronic systems anywhere. And once you can drive something like that, and you go back and you go back and you go back, and you get a level of competency where you're comfortable with a car like that, you've ingrained all that stuff, you're flowing in a car like that, go rip around in that GT3 with everything turned off, and you're a driver now.
Yeah, and even more, I think if you want to go do a lot of lapping days and you don't want to go over to a school or rent a race car for a long period of time, buy a car that's underpowered that handles well.
Yeah,
like
that helps.
Like buy a GT4 car with 450 horsepower instead of a 1,000 horsepower street car that weighs 1,000 pounds more, or buy a Miata or an MX-5, which are a blast to drive, and get some coaching.
Good
from a professional coach.
Yep.
But a car that's easy to drive in the limit, that will teach you good
habits,
fundamental habits. Because if you have a car that's easy to drive, it's well balanced, it's not overpowered, you have a good coach, you put those two together, your skills will go way up. And then when you get to the harder car with more power, you can do it.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's the way to do it, to own the skills, not to rely on because it is getting better. Every year these systems get better. At some point, you're barely going to be driving the car. So that's really important to remember, that this whole driving aspect of this, and if you're going to get respect as a racer at any level, whether it's amateur motorsports, working your way into professional motorsports, it's going to have to be without those systems. Now, those systems are used in some forms of motorsport, and because the motorsports versions of those systems are so amazingly good, you kind of have to use them to be competitive. Unfortunately, I'm not happy that that's a thing,
but honestly,
it is a thing.
All my professional drivers all use the ABS and are all fast with the ABS. You can't beat ABS, racing ABS.
Right.
But
racing ABS is different.
But they all turn the traction control off.
Right.
And can go faster with it off than with it on. When it comes to
Thank
car
God.
racing.
Thank
so
God.
we're still better than the computer.
Yes. Human beings win. Thanks for sticking with us through this. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'm going to do more and more podcasts. I'm going to have more and more guests. If I can ever get Steve to not be a guest, it sounds like he wants to come back and talk continuously, which I'd happily have
I could do that, yeah.
So I want to thank you, Steve, for coming out.
Thank you.
Great friend, great mentor, amazing engineer, great driver.
You too, man.
And always a pleasure getting to chat with you on any level. And so getting to do it like this and get to share it on a podcast is pretty special. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
All right.
And yeah, join me again for another podcast with the Optimum Drive. And that's, of course, promoted and made possible by the Fast Lane car. So thank you, everyone at Fast Lane, for letting me do this. And hopefully we'll get to do some more.